My son started to feel ashamed of me because I worked as a cleaner to support him, and that destroyed me. There is this one memory that always pops up first when I try to explain how everything went wrong, and it is not even the worst moment. Just the one that kind of sums up the whole mess in one picture. Me in my work pants, still smelling like cleaning products, standing in the doorway of this fancy party room while my own son looks straight through me like I am just part of the staff. I did not get to that scene overnight, though, so I guess I have to start earlier, back when I still believed that surviving together was the same thing as being on the same side, and that love could make people forget where they came from, instead of making them desperate to run from it. I married my husband when I was 24, and still thought that working hard automatically meant things would slowly get better. Like there was some kind of invisible scale in the sky keeping track of every extra shift and every skipped treat. He had grown up in a complete mess of a home, with parents who collected failed relationships and overdue bills, and he used to joke that marrying me was the first grown-up choice he ever made. I did not come from anything glamorous either, but my chaos was the boring type. Just low-income, crowded apartments, and a mother who counted every coin twice before letting herself buy something that was not on sale. By the time we got married, I had already been working as a cleaner in office buildings for years, walking into shiny lobbies before the sun came up and leaving after everyone with a badge and a title had already gone home. He was waiting tables at a neighborhood restaurant, living off tips and caffeine, and when we looked at our numbers together, it was not pretty, but it was enough to pay rent on a small place, keep groceries in the fridge, and still argue about which cheap streaming plan we could afford. When I found out I was pregnant, it was not this magical movie scene with surprise flowers and happy tears. It was me sitting on the edge of the tub staring at a cheap test from the corner store, feeling my throat close and my chest open at the same time, and then him sitting on the bathroom floor with his head in his hands saying, very quietly, that we would make it work somehow. We did not have the luxury of me staying home, not even for a little while, so I kept working through the pregnancy, adjusting my pace but still scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans while my back screamed and my ankles turned into balloons by the end of each shift. We looked into daycare for when the baby arrived, did the math 3 different ways, and every single time the numbers laughed in our faces. There was no version where we paid daycare and still ate, so we did the only thing that made sense back then. After our son was born, my husband quit his job to stay home with the baby, and I took every hour my cleaning company offered me. People love calling that kind of decision modern or progressive when it is done by couples in cute apartments with savings and white furniture. But the truth is, we were just cornered by math. I got lucky a few months later when a bigger cleaning company took over some of the buildings I already worked in and offered me a full-time contract with better pay and more predictability. It was not some massive jump, but it meant I could stop wondering every week if I would be short on hours, and eventually they made me a shift lead, which was just a fancy way to say I had keys and slightly more responsibility for almost the same money. But the small raise still felt like a miracle back then. By the time our son turned 3, we had moved from surviving month to month to this very careful version of stability where the bills were paid on time most months, we could buy fresh fruit without panicking, and I could pick up something small for him at the store without needing 10 minutes of internal debate. He was this loud, curious kid who followed my husband around the apartment like a little shadow, and even though part of me hated that I was not the one at home seeing all his firsts, another part of me felt proud every time I looked at him and remembered that I was the reason the lights stayed on. My husband used to tell me in those early years that I was his hero for working so hard, and I believed him, because back then it sounded like gratitude, not foreshadowing. When our son started school, though, everything shifted in this slow, sneaky way that I did not catch until it was already eating us from the inside. With him gone for most of the day, my husband started pacing the apartment like a caged animal, constantly talking about how he felt useless and stuck, how it was weird to be an adult man who did not have a job to introduce himself with. I understood. I really did. I knew what it meant to measure your worth in paychecks and job titles, even if the title was just the woman who cleans the bathrooms. So when he said he wanted to go back to work, I agreed before he even finished the sentence. We sat down with our schedules and our bills and figured out a plan where I would shift some of my hours to earlier in the day or later at night, so I could be the one picking up our son from school most days, helping with homework, actually getting to attend things like school plays instead of hearing about them secondhand. For a little while, the new routine actually felt good. My husband came home with stories from coworkers and regular customers. With this spark, I had not seen in his eyes in a long time, and I got to do the mom things I had secretly been jealous of. I would show up at the school in my work clothes, still smelling faintly of disinfectant, and my son would run into my arms like he did not care what I looked like or how tired I was, and it genuinely filled something in me that had been empty for too long. I picked up more of the housework on weekends to make up for his hours outside, telling myself it was temporary, that once we both found our rhythm, it would balance out again. Back then, I thought we were building something together. I did not realize he was already starting to look over the fence at other lives. He eventually landed a job as an assistant instructor at this high-end gym across town, the kind of place where people pay ridiculous amounts of money to run on machines inside while the rest of us walk everywhere because gas is expensive. He came home talking about the clients there like they were characters in some glossy show, describing their clothes and their vacations and how they treated spending extra on everything like it was nothing. At first, it just sounded like this weird fascination, like he was getting a glimpse into a world so different from ours that it almost felt fake. But slowly, the way he talked about it changed. Our tiny apartment went from cozy to cramped. Our old car became embarrassing, and my cleaning job, which he used to brag about because it kept us afloat, turned into something he side-eyed, like it was a temporary stage I should have grown out of already. He started saying things like, if you pushed for that supervisor position, we could move sooner, or maybe if you picked up a couple of weekend shifts, we could finally get out of this neighborhood. And even though he framed it like we were planning our future together, the pressure settled squarely on my back. At the same time, he began staying out later after work, claiming that he had to go to social events with coworkers or grab drinks with clients because that is just how networking works in this industry. And I found myself putting our son to bed alone more nights than not. When our son asked where his dad was, I repeated whatever excuse I had been given and tried not to show how hollow it sounded in my own ears. I did not notice exactly when our boy stopped asking for his father at bedtime, and just accepted that it would be me reading the stories and tucking him in, but that silence was its own kind of answer. I kept telling myself that my husband was just in a weird phase, getting used to being back in the working world, adjusting to a new environment where everyone seemed to own 3 houses and a boat, and that he would eventually remember the life we had actually built and not the one he thought he deserved. Looking back, I can see how naive that was. But at the time, I was too busy juggling schedules and counting tips in my head to realize how much resentment was quietly replacing gratitude in him. The night everything blew up started like 100 other nights. With me already half asleep on the couch, still in my work clothes, the television flickering in the background while I waited to hear his key in the lock. Our son was 7 then, asleep in the bedroom with his little collection of school drawings taped to the wall. And the apartment was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. When the door finally opened, it was not just late, it was wrecked. Like he had brought the chaos from whatever bar he had been in straight into our front room. I smelled the alcohol before I even saw his face. And when I turned, he was swaying slightly, his eyes glassy in that particular way that says drunk but not happy, drunk and mean. I asked where he had been, not even yelling, just that tired edge all over my voice, and instead of giving me some lazy excuse like he usually did, he laughed, this ugly little laugh that did not sound like him at all, and said he was done pretending. At first I thought he meant he was done pretending that the late nights were innocent, that he would finally admit he had a problem with drinking or that the job was getting to him, but what he actually meant crashed over me in broken sentences. He told me he wanted a divorce with this weird, rehearsed calm, and then he dropped the part about having been seeing one of the clients from the gym for a year. A year. 12 months of me working double shifts and rearranging my life, while he was building a whole secret relationship with a woman who, as he so helpfully added, actually understands the kind of life I want. She was older, he said around 60, successful, owned her own small business and some rental properties, and she was charismatic and well-connected in a way he had never experienced before. He loved how important he felt standing next to her, and she made him feel like he could be more than just the kid from a broken home who married the cleaner girl. He had this almost proud tone in his voice when he described her, like he was reading from a brochure, and all I could think about, standing there in my stained work shirt with my hands shaking, was that he had chosen someone who would never have to wipe crumbs off a cheap kitchen counter at midnight. Someone who already had the life he used to say we would build together. When I asked about our son, about what exactly he thought was going to happen to the child who had been waiting for him at that door for 7 years, he shrugged, and said he figured the boy would be better off with me, that he was not cut out for parenting anyway, and did not see himself fighting for custody. The worst part was when he admitted that his grand plan with this woman did not include our son at all, not even on weekends, really, because she was not looking to start over raising somebody else's kid and wanted to travel and enjoy her money. He just said it, like it was this neutral fact, like our son was an optional add-on he could just skip. I felt something in me crack in that moment, not the soft heartbreak you feel when someone disappoints you a little, but that deep, ugly snap of realizing the person you built your whole life around is actually willing to treat your child like luggage. So we got divorced. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes, no long legal battles, just some basic paperwork, a custody agreement that basically confirmed what he wanted anyway, and a judge who looked at our income and our schedules and decided that full physical custody should be with me, with visitation rights for him if and when he felt like showing up. He was supposed to pay child support, but he treated it like a suggestion. Some months it came, other months it did not, and the gifts were always louder than the responsibility. I walked out of that building technically free, just me and my son against the world, but it did not feel like freedom. It felt like walking out of a burning house with only your kid and the clothes on your back, knowing you still smell like smoke. The next years were a blur of early mornings, late nights, and the kind of exhaustion that does not just sit in your muscles, but in your bones. I kept my cleaning job, took every extra building they offered, and did everything I could to make sure my son had what he needed. I was the one up at dawn packing lunches, the one sitting in those tiny cafeteria chairs at school meetings, the one learning how to fix leaky faucets from video tutorials because calling a handyman was a luxury. His father drifted in and out like some kind of visiting celebrity, showing up every couple of months with expensive sneakers, fancy gadgets, or tickets to events I barely recognized from the names alone. It was like he had decided that his role was to be the fun parent who dropped in with gifts, while I handled all the boring parts of parenting that do not look good in pictures. He would pick our son up in a borrowed car or one that clearly did not scream tight budget, drive him off to some fancy dinner or activity, and bring him home full of stories about how amazing everything was over there. I tried to focus on the fact that at least he was showing up sometimes, that our son needed both parents in some shape or form, but it was hard not to feel the sting when my kid came home comparing their outings to our regular nights of pasta and cartoons. One year, right around our son's 12th birthday, his father actually came to the small birthday thing I planned in our cramped living room. It was just a few of his school friends, some simple food I had stayed up late cooking, a homemade cake that leaned a little to one side, the whole we do what we can vibe that had always been our reality. His father walked in, looked around with this little smirk, and in front of everyone asked if I was still cleaning toilets for a living or if I had finally found a real job. I laughed it off, because what else was I supposed to do in the middle of my kid's birthday party? But inside, I felt like he had just taken a knife to every sacrifice I had ever made. After the party, my son cornered me in the kitchen and asked, very seriously, why I did not try to do something better if I hated my job so much, because his dad said I could make more money if I had more ambition. I wanted to scream that the only reason his father could stand there making jokes was because I had been busting my ass for years. But instead, I just told him the truth, that it was honest work, that it had kept us afloat, that not everyone gets a career they love, and that I chose stability for him over chasing dreams I could not afford. He listened, but I could see from his eyes that the damage was already done. His father had planted the idea that I was small, that I was limited by choice, not circumstance. Later that same year, there was an important event at his school, some award thing he had been really excited about, and his father promised he would be there. My son kept checking his phone that night, glancing at the door every time someone new walked in, and I sat beside him, trying to hold my own disappointment together, while repeating that maybe traffic was bad, maybe parking was impossible, all the usual lies we tell kids, so they do not have to feel the full weight of adult unreliability. His father never showed up. Instead, he sent a new device, some expensive thing, through a delivery service, with a short message about being caught up with work. Watching my son open that box, trying to act happy while his eyes kept flicking toward the empty seat next to him, was one of the few times I genuinely wanted to throw a gift out the window. Not long after that, in the middle of one of our inevitable arguments, my son said he would rather live with his dad because at least there he did not feel poor all the time. It was like being punched in the lungs. I had known for a while that the visits, the gifts, the glamorous stories were creating some kind of gap between us. But hearing it out loud from his mouth made me realize that the man who had walked away from us had somehow still managed to take my kid with him in a different way. As he moved into his teenage years, everything just sharpened. His father married the wealthy woman officially, and suddenly there were pictures all over this social media app of them in matching outfits at nice restaurants. Of my son in clothes I definitely did not buy. Of trips to places I had only ever seen in magazine pictures at waiting rooms. The narrative they built, very carefully, was that this woman was opening doors for him, giving him opportunities I could never have afforded, that she was some kind of fairy godmother stepping in where the poor, tired mom had failed. She paid for an expensive course he wanted to take. They took him on trips during school breaks, and every visit to their big house added another layer to the story he was telling himself about what a good life looked like. I kept doing what I had always done, working, showing up, trying to be consistent even when I was exhausted and bitter and wanted to scream every time I saw another picture of my son smiling next to them at some place I did not even know how to pronounce. The tension between us grew like mold in a damp corner, quietly at first, then suddenly everywhere. One night, during a particularly bad argument about him coming home late from their place and snapping at me over something small, he finally said it plainly, that I held him back, that I was trying to keep him in this tiny life because I was scared, that if I really loved him, I would want him to move into that world, not cling to this one. I wanted to tell him that what I wanted more than anything was for him not to turn into the kind of man who treated people as stepping stones, that the life I was scared of was not the one with money, but the one where love was a performance, where respect was always conditional on status. Instead, I just told him I loved him, that I was doing the best I could, and watched him roll his eyes like I had said something pathetic. Somehow the years sped up after that. Middle school turned into high school, and I was watching him grow taller while feeling smaller in his eyes. He turned 18 eventually, announced that he wanted to become a barber, and I was actually proud that he had chosen something practical and creative that did not depend on his father's wife's bank account. I scraped together the money to pay for his course, worked extra hours, cut corners everywhere. And when he graduated and started working at a shop, I stood there taking pictures with my old phone, thinking this might be the beginning of us finding each other again. That hope did not last long. Once he was earning his own money and spending more and more time at his father's house, the calls to me got shorter, the visits fewer, and our relationship turned into this thing that existed mostly through quick text messages and occasional holiday dinners where he seemed restless and half present. I was still technically his mother, but more and more I felt like an old teacher he had once been close to, someone from a chapter he had closed. By the time he turned 24, he was engaged to a woman I barely knew. He and his partner had been dating for a while, but I met her in passing twice, always at events organized by his father or the other side of the family, where I felt like a guest of a guest, someone who had received an invitation by mistake. When they announced the engagement, it was through a group message that included me along with a bunch of people I had never met. The photo was taken at some scenic place during a trip I had not even heard about. The wedding planning kicked into full gear, and I watched it happen mostly from the outside. I was not involved in choosing the venue, the dress, the colors, or any of the things you imagine a mother might help with. I did not expect to pick out centerpieces or anything, but I thought maybe I would at least be asked about the music, or where I would like to sit. Instead, I found out through an offhand comment from a relative that the seating chart had me tucked into a side table with some distant cousins, nowhere near the front rows reserved for immediate family. When I asked my son about it, he said something like, "Oh, we just thought it would be easier this way. Less drama," as if my feelings were a scheduling problem, not something that mattered. He also told me not to get there too early on the day of the wedding because they did not want people hovering around while they were getting ready, which stung more than I wanted to admit. Then came the part that broke something I did not even know was still intact. One afternoon, we were talking about the reception, and I asked casually if he had thought about the mother and son dance. He looked uncomfortable and said he had been thinking of skipping that tradition altogether because it felt kind of outdated, and he did not want anything too sentimental. I swallowed my disappointment, told him it was his day and his choice, and tried to convince myself that maybe it was better, that I did not want to stand in front of everyone swaying awkwardly, while they all judged my dress. A few days later, I was at a small gathering where his fiancée was talking to one of her friends, and they were excitedly going over the playlist for the reception. The friend mentioned how sweet the mother and son dance was going to be, and the fiancé, without thinking, said something like, "I know," and he picked the perfect song for his dance with his stepmom. "She is going to cry for sure." I froze. I am not proud of what I did next. I did not confront anyone right there. I just quietly slipped outside, waited until I was alone, and then texted my son a simple question. Who exactly was he planning to dance with? At first, he tried to deny it, got defensive, said I was misunderstanding things and that people were gossiping. But when I told him exactly what I had heard, he finally admitted it. He had chosen to do the special dance with his stepmother. He said she had been there for him in his most important years, that she had helped him with opportunities, that she made him feel comfortable in the circles he moved in now, and that he did not want to make things weird by ignoring her in front of everyone. He threw in some line about how our relationship was private and complicated, and he did not want to put that on display. I cannot fully describe what that felt like. It was not just jealousy or hurt pride. It was this deep, cold humiliation, like he had taken every sacrifice I had ever made and quietly handed the credit to someone else in front of an audience. I told him, as calmly as I could with my hands shaking, that it hurt me deeply, that it felt like being erased, and he responded with something about how I was making it all about me on his day. That night I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from his childhood, all the nights I carried him when he had a fever, all the mornings I left before dawn to keep us afloat, and I realized I could not force myself to sit in that room and watch him publicly replace me. So I decided I was not going to the wedding. It was not a dramatic rage decision. It was this slow, painful conclusion that kept coming back no matter how many times I tried to talk myself out of it. When I told him, he reacted exactly how I knew he would, accusing me of being selfish, saying I would ruin his day, that people would talk, that I was proving everyone right about me being difficult. His fiancée called me separately, trying to mediate, saying she understood I was hurt, but that my absence would devastate him. I told her the truth too, that I had been devastated for years and that for once, I had to choose myself. On the night before the wedding, I turned my phone off for a few hours because I knew there would be calls and messages trying to wear me down, and I was afraid that if I heard his voice while he was in full panic mode, I would cave like I always had. I turned it back on in the morning and there were messages waiting. But what really hit was the call that came through right as I was trying to decide if I should shower or just stay in my pajamas all day and pretend the event did not exist. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered without thinking, and all I could hear at first was frantic breathing and background noise. It was my son, calling from someone else's phone, and he was in full meltdown. He was crying so hard he could barely get the words out, but I pieced them together. His father had shown up to the venue drunk, not slightly buzzed, but completely gone, causing a scene with the bride's parents, hitting on people, saying inappropriate things. The bride's parents, who cared a lot about appearances and reputation, were furious, and the whole situation was spiraling. My son kept saying I needed to come, that I was the only one who could calm his father down, that I had to fix it before everything was ruined. For a second, I almost grabbed my keys. Instinct kicked in, the old muscle memory of rushing in to clean up other people's messes, to sacrifice my own safety, my dignity, my feelings just to keep things from falling apart. But then I remembered the dance, the seat at the back, the years of being treated like an embarrassment, and I heard myself say something I had never said to him before, that I could not help him. I told him I was sorry that things were a mess, that it sounded awful, but that I was not his emergency contact anymore. He begged, his voice cracking, saying I was still his mother, that I could not just sit at home while his life exploded. And I reminded him very quietly that when he planned the event, he had made it clear who he wanted in the front row and who he did not. He tried to say it was not the same thing, that this was different, that he needed me, and I could feel my resolve wobbling a little. But then he said something about how if I really loved him, I would put my pride aside. And that was it. Pride is such a convenient word people use when they mean the bare minimum of self-respect. And I realized that for him, me having boundaries did not fit into his idea of what a mother was supposed to be. I told him I loved him, that I always had, but that I had spent his entire life setting myself on fire to keep everyone warm, and I was done being the designated extinguisher for problems I did not create. Then I hung up. I broke down after that, sobbing in the hallway like I had just watched him get hurt physically, not emotionally. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on the floor to breathe. The guilt came in waves. Maybe I should have gone just this once. Maybe it would have been the thing that finally brought us back together. Maybe I was being cruel. But under all that, there was a calmer voice, one I was not used to hearing, that kept reminding me that every time I had rescued his father in the past, nobody had thanked me, and things had never changed. I did not answer when the same number called again 15 minutes later, and eventually, the call stopped. I did not find out exactly what happened at the venue until days later, when the dust had settled and people started talking. A friend of a friend who had been there filled me in, and the story was like watching a slow-motion car crash. My son's father had arrived at the wedding already drunk enough to stumble, wearing a suit that did not fit quite right, loud and overly friendly in that way that makes everyone uncomfortable. He started hitting on the bride's mother, making comments about how good she looked for her age, touching her arm, not taking the hint when she tried to pull away. The bride's parents, who took everything about this wedding personally, were horrified. As if that was not enough, when my son's stepmother tried to pull him aside and calm him down, he started loudly airing out their dirty laundry in front of anyone who happened to be standing nearby, accusing her of cheating on him, of only being with him because she wanted someone to show off, of using her money to control everyone. He shouted about things that had obviously been festering for years, saying how she had never wanted him involved with his old life, meaning me and our son, and how she had made him feel like a guest in his own house. Guests started to quietly move toward the exits while pretending not to stare. At some point, he lost his balance and fell into a row of chairs, knocking them over like dominoes, while the wedding planner tried desperately to keep things together. The bride's parents finally had enough. They told their daughter they were not going to stand there and pretend this was normal, that they would not be part of a union with a family that brought that kind of chaos into such an important day. They walked out, and a decent chunk of their side of the guest list followed them. The officiant refused to proceed, and the venue manager called security, so the ceremony was officially shut down before anyone could walk down the aisle. The wedding never actually happened. There was no exchange of vows, no dance, no cake cutting, just a mess of shouting, crying, and people trying to leave without getting dragged into it. My son sent me a long email a few days after that. It was one of those messages where someone tries to do everything at once. Apologize, explain, justify, blame. He wrote about how embarrassed he was, how furious he was with his father, how heartbroken he felt about his fiancé's parents pulling the plug. But he also made sure to slip in a line about how if I had been there, I might have been able to stop it. He did not write it outright as "this is your fault," but the implication was there, hanging between the sentences. I stared at that email for a long time and then closed it without replying. I realized that if I responded, I would probably fall into one of my usual roles: the comforter, the explainer, the peacekeeper. I would say something reassuring about how what happened was not his fault, about how maybe things could still be fixed, and in doing that, I would take on responsibility again for a disaster I had not created. So I did something new. Nothing. I let his words sit in his inbox and stayed silent. It felt unnatural, wrong even, but also strangely calm, like sitting completely still after running for years. The months after the canceled wedding were rough. I did not suddenly become some glowing example of self-care just because I started ignoring emails. There were days when I barely got out of bed, when the quiet in my apartment felt like punishment instead of peace, when I replayed every choice I had ever made as a mother, and wondered where exactly I had lost him. I questioned that wedding decision 1,000 times. Could I have prevented the whole disaster just by showing up and babysitting my ex one last time? Would my son still be engaged? Still think of that day as a happy memory instead of a nightmare? Then, slowly, life started sneaking back in through the cracks. One of my neighbors, a woman who had nodded hello in the hallway for years but we had never really talked, knocked on my door one afternoon with a bag full of yarn and said she was dragging me to this little community craft group she went to every week. I tried to say no, that I was tired, that I was not crafty, that I had too much to do, but she refused to leave until I agreed. I showed up at that group expecting to feel awkward and out of place, but instead there was this weird warmth in the room, a mix of women of different ages talking over each other while their hands moved automatically, knitting, crocheting, beading, whatever. At first I just sat there, pretending to care about the scarf I was half-heartedly trying to make, but week after week I kept going, and without even realizing it, I started telling them bits and pieces of my life. Not the whole saga at once, but little stories, a comment my ex had made, something my son had posted on social media, how the wedding had crumbled. They did not judge me or try to fix it with fake wisdom. They just listened and sometimes made jokes at the expense of the men involved, which was exactly the kind of therapy I needed. Little by little, those evenings became something I actually looked forward to, a break from the loop in my head. It was one of those women who convinced me to try a dating app. I laughed in her face at first, told her I was too old, too tired, too messed up, that I had no interest in going on awkward coffee dates with strangers. She rolled her eyes and said I was not being asked to marry anyone, just to have conversations that were not about cleaning supplies or past trauma. We sat on my couch one afternoon, and she helped me set up a profile, choosing pictures that did not make me look like I was about to clock into work, and writing a bio that was honest but not depressing. I remember feeling ridiculous, like I was trespassing in a space meant for younger, shinier people, but at the same time there was a tiny spark of curiosity. I matched with a few men who went nowhere, Conversations that died after 2 messages or turned into boring small talk about the weather and favorite shows. Then I matched with someone who, on paper, did not look like anything special. Divorced, had a regular job in maintenance at a building, liked cooking, had a grown child he was not very close to. We started talking, and something about the way he asked questions, actually listened, did not rush to prove anything, made me feel strangely comfortable. We messaged back and forth for weeks before I agreed to meet in person, because I was still half convinced he would turn out to be a serial liar or someone with a secret family. Our first meeting was supposed to be quick, just a drink at a quiet place not far from my apartment, but it turned into hours of conversation. We traded stories, some funny, some painful, and he did not flinch when I told him about my ex, about my son, about the wedding. He did not try to play therapist, did not insult my son, did not act like he was the hero for just listening. He just nodded, asked follow-up questions, and at one point, when I apologized for rambling, he laughed and said, "You know you are allowed to take up space, right?" I went home that night feeling lighter than I had in a long time. We kept seeing each other. There were no grand gestures, no whirlwind romance montage, just a slow, steady building of trust. He showed up when he said he would. He texted when he was going to be late. He never made jokes about my job. He did not treat my past like baggage he had to tolerate, but he also did not use it as an excuse to put me on a pedestal. It was normal, which felt almost exotic after the emotional roller coaster I had gotten used to. Months went by, and without really making a big decision, he slowly became part of my daily life. Meanwhile, I heard bits and pieces about my son through other people. The engagement was officially over. The ex-fiancé had moved on, her parents had cut off all contact with his family, and he had moved back in, at least temporarily, with his father and stepmother. Then came rumors that the relationship between his father and that woman was crumbling too, that the drunken incident at the wedding had ripped open things they had both been pretending were fine. I did not feel schadenfreude exactly. It was more like this numb confirmation that the shiny, perfect life my ex had chased had rust under the surface just like everything else. My son sent a couple more emails over the next year. They had fewer apologies and more analysis, like he was trying to build a case in his own defense. He talked about how hard it had been growing up between two very different worlds, how confusing it was to have one parent who could barely pay bills and another who made money appear like magic. He wrote about the pressure he had felt to pick a side, to prove he was not ungrateful to the one who paid for courses and trips. And between all of that, there were little jabs, suggestions that if I had made more money, if I had been less tired, if I had tried harder to fit into their world, things would have been different. None of those messages contained the words, "I am sorry," in a simple, clear way, so I kept not answering. I do not know exactly when 5 years slipped by, but suddenly I was looking at a calendar and realizing that the anniversary of the non-wedding had come and gone multiple times. By then, the man I had met through the app was no longer just someone I was dating. He was my partner, my constant. We had moved in together into a slightly bigger place that still was not fancy but felt like home, with mismatched furniture we both had collected over the years, and a kitchen where we actually cooked together instead of eating over the sink. We talked about everything, fought sometimes in regular human ways, made up without anyone threatening to leave the country in a fit of drama. When he asked me to marry him, it was not some elaborate surprise. It was a conversation at our kitchen table after dinner, where he said he could not imagine growing old with anyone else, and asked if I felt the same. I did. Our wedding was small, held at a modest community center room decorated by our friends from the craft group. There was no strict dress code, no seating chart, no dedicated dance for anyone's ego. I did not invite my ex-husband, obviously. I did not invite my son either. Part of me hesitated, wondered if that would finally close a door that maybe could still be cracked open, but the truth was that door had been closing from his side for years. I had heard through mutual contacts that he had eventually married someone else, a woman from a regular background. Not rich, not obsessed with appearances, just normal. They had a small ceremony, nothing like the production the first one was supposed to be, and he had not invited me. I found out after the fact, and this time the knowledge did not stab me in the same way. It hurt, of course, but it felt more like a dull ache, the kind you get from old injuries when the weather changes. I imagined him standing there, saying vows again, and I hoped, in a distant way, that he would treat this woman better than he had treated me, better than he had allowed himself to treat me. Every now and then, someone will mention him in passing, or show me a recent picture of him they saw online, and I still feel that brief freeze inside, like my body has to process his name before my mind does. I do not hate him. That would be too simple. What I feel is this complicated mix of love, loss, regret, anger, and acceptance that does not have a clean label. The same goes for my son. He is still out there, living his life, cutting hair, paying bills, posting pictures with his new wife and their friends. He has my number. My email has not changed. If he ever wants to have a real conversation, one that does not involve assigning me a role in his personal drama, I am here. I just will not be the one chasing anymore. As for my ex-husband, last I heard, he and the rich woman finally split for good. Apparently all the things he used to brag about, her money, her connections, her elegant circle, came with conditions he could not always meet. When he lost his charm or embarrassed her too publicly, the support dried up. He went from being the shiny project to the headache she did not want to deal with. The irony of him ending up alone after abandoning the family he had built with me is not lost on me. But instead of enjoying it, I mostly just feel tired. He was the first person I ever thought of as home, and now he is just someone whose name makes me check that my emotional locks are still secure. I still clean offices for a living. People sometimes assume that after all of this, I must have gone back to school or changed careers, found some new calling, but the truth is, I did not. I got better contracts, sure, shifted to buildings that pay a little more and treat staff with slightly more respect. But I am still the woman pushing the cart down the hallway, wiping fingerprints off glass doors so other people can walk into shiny lobbies and feel important. For a long time, I was ashamed of that. I thought my worth depended on how far I could get from the version of me who scrubbed bathrooms for a paycheck. Now, when I put on my uniform, I still sometimes feel that old sting when someone looks right through me. But it is not as sharp. I know what this job has paid for. A roof, food, the chance for my son to take a course, the little savings account I share with my new husband for emergencies. I know the strength it took to keep clocking in when my heart was broken, when my body hurt, when my own child looked at me like I was small. I do not need anyone else to understand that for it to be real. Sometimes, late at night, when my new husband is asleep and the apartment is quiet except for distant traffic sounds, I catch myself thinking about that canceled wedding. Not because I wish I had been there, but because that is the day I finally realized I was allowed to stop begging people to see me. I was allowed to sit one out, even if it made other people uncomfortable. I was allowed to let someone else's disaster unfold without jumping in as the unpaid cleanup crew. If you are waiting for some neat ending where my son shows up at my door in tears and we hug and everything is healed, I am sorry. That is not how real life works, at least not mine. Maybe one day we will talk. Maybe we will never see each other again. Both possibilities hurt in different ways, but neither one defines me anymore. For the first time since I was 24 and holding a positive pregnancy test with shaking hands, my life is not built around what he or his father chooses to do. My life is built around quieter things now. The way my new husband laughs at his own bad jokes. The way my craft group friends always bring too much food. The way clean floors shine under fluorescent lights at 3 a.m. when nobody else is around. None of it is glamorous. None of it would make a good commercial. But it is mine. And if that makes me small in some people's eyes, then maybe small is better than invisible, because at least I can see myself clearly here. And I am finally done apologizing for the space I take up. Did you enjoy this story? Joy? Even though it's fictional and made for entertainment, it can reflect real situations that many people live through in silence. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were in her place? And do you think she made the right choice by not going to the wedding? If this story kept you watching until the end, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. See you in the next video.